Week 3 of the fantasy football season, and he has tight end start sits every matchup this week. The first matchup Thursday Night Football, New York Giants at the San Francisco 49ers. So Darren Waller, I'm going to have him to start this week. With Saquon Barkley out, I think there's going to be more emphasis on getting the football to Darren Waller. Obviously, he's their best offensive weapon now, is his Giant team. And this could be a ball game where they're down early and often and have to throw like they did at the Arizona Cardinals a whole bunch of times. So this week, Waller's a start. Now to the Niners start of things, I'm going to start George Kittle. I know the first 2 weeks, he hasn't done anything in fantasy football. Only 10 fantasy points the whole year for Kittle in the first 2 weeks of the season. But we know he's an athletic tight end. We know him, Brock Purdy, in the red zone especially have a good chemistry going where he's a big target. Last season, 11 touchdowns. And this week here versus the New York Giant defense that isn't good versus the tight ends, really. I got him as a start this week. Now to the Los Angeles Chargers at the Minnesota Vikings. This week, Gerald Everett, I have him as a borderline option. Last week, he looked pretty decent, Gerald Everett, making a few plays in the middle of the field, breaking some tackles, but he still only ended up in that ball game with 7 fantasy points. So this week here versus a mediocre Minnesota Viking defense, I think we're going to see more Keenan Allen once again, obviously, and Mike Williams make the big plays. And Everett, in maybe deeper leagues you want to start him, but 12-team basic leagues, he's borderline to me. TJ Hawkinson, so far one of the best tight ends, if not the best in fantasy football the first 2 weeks of the season, coming off a 2-touchdown game last week. And each and every week, obviously, he's a start. Now to the Bills at the Washington Commanders. Right now, Kincaid and Dawson Knox, to me, that sits in this ball game. I know Dawson Knox, he had a touchdown last week in that one for the Bills versus the Vegas Raiders. But if he didn't get that touchdown, he pretty much only had 4 or 5 fantasy points in that ball game. So this week here, Dawson Knox is a sit. Dalton Kincaid, we know he's a rookie. I know Buffalo's been running more 2 tight end sets to start the season here, but even Kincaid, we really haven't seen much out of him in the early going. He's a sit. Now to the Commanders side of things, Logan Thomas, he had a pretty decent ball game to start, but then he got banged up as usual at the Denver Broncos. So he's a sit for me as Logan Thomas. He just can never stay healthy. I know a few years ago he did stay healthy and he had the monster season, but right now he's banged up with a concussion and in the protocol, and he's probably not going to start in this ball game. You see Logan Thomas, and even by some chance he does play in this game, for me he is Logan Thomas. Start John Bates will be the starter in this ball game, and he's a sit for me in this point. I know Bates, he came with some decent numbers after Thomas left the game. 3 catches, 46 yards, but a tough matchup versus Bill defense. One of the best defenses in the league where they pretty much don't give up a lot of numbers to the tight end position. So right now, Bates and Thomas, whoever starts in this one and plays, are both sits. Now to the New Orleans Saints at the Green Bay Packers. Juwan Johnson, so far in the year we really haven't seen much out of Juwan Johnson from this New Orleans Saints team. It's a pretty decent matchup here, but Juwan Johnson and Derek Carr aren't on the same page so far in the early going. Juwan Johnson had good chemistry with Andy Dalton last season, but so far this year we haven't seen much out of him, and he's an easy tight end to sit this week. Luke Musgrave, he's a sit for me as well. So far, one good game and one game where he didn't do much here is Musgrave, but him and Jordan Love, as the season goes on, I think we'll build on something better. And Musgrave right now, like I said, it's his rookie year. There's going to be some good games and some mediocre games, but this week here versus the New Orleans Saints team that plays good defense versus the tight ends, and they haven't given up much so far in the early going versus the position. He's a sit for me. Now to the Falcons at the Lions. In this one, Kyle Pitts is a sit for me. The first couple weeks here, we just haven't seen anything out of Kyle Pitts, and it's not 100% his fault. Week 1, he had one big catch for 45 yards that pretty much saved his fantasy day, and then last week, 3.5 fantasy points for Kyle Pitts in week 2. So right now, if I'm a fantasy owner, I'm going out there and streaming a guy this week. But I'm not dropping Kyle Pitts, but I'm obviously going to put him on the bench and see if he could break out in this one, because right now we're already in week 3. I know some teams, they wait to make adjustments, but right now I'm not going to sit and wait to see if Pitts could get going. So right now for Jake Ferguson is on your waiver wire, even a Zach Ertz, even though it's a tough matchup this week here. Those are guys I might prefer over a Pitts this week. Now to Sam Laporta, he's a start for me this week. So far in the early going, Laporta, he's been a nice addition to this passing game for this Detroit Lion team. And we know last season TJ Hawkinson was a solid Detroit Lion for the last few seasons before they traded him at the deadline over to the Minnesota Vikings, but they drafted Laporta, and he's putting up solid numbers the first 2 weeks of the season. 20 fantasy points in PPR leagues here for Sam Laporta. So this week here in a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons and another potential shootout He's a start for me. Now to the Titans. At the Cleveland Browns, Chigna Okongwu, he came off with a decent ball game in week 2. After week 1, he had the old goose egg, was Okongwu, but he's still not a tight end that I'm going to have a lot of confidence in coming into this week here is Okongwu. So right now, week 2, we had 7.5 fantasy points. Week 3, a tougher matchup here at the Cleveland Browns. And this offense as a whole, Tennessee on the road just isn't that good. So right now, Okongwu at best. I have him as a borderline option. Now to David Njoku. So far, him and Deshaun Watson, like I mentioned, really haven't been on the same page in the early going since the late last season when Watson came back suspension, and so far this season. So this week here, I'm going to steer away from David Njoku. I know many fantasy owners went out there and drafted him pretty early, 7th, 8th round in their fantasy leagues. But right now, Njoku's not getting the job done. Deshaun Watson, he's still not on the same page with a lot of guys on this offense. And he's a sit for me. Now to the Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Dalton Schultz is a sit. And I've said this a lot in my videos if people have been watching the channel. I think Dalton Schultz was a product of the Dallas Cowboy offense, where obviously it's a friendly offense for the tight ends on PA boots and stuff like that. And Dak Prescott always relied on the tight end, going back to Jason Witten many seasons ago. So in this one, he's a sit for me. Next, Evan Ingram's a start. I know week 2 wasn't a great ball game for Evan Ingram, but he's still a tight end that could go out there and make plays. It's a good matchup on paper. Like I said, him and Lawrence last season had a good rapport. And this week here versus a pretty weak Texan defense, I think he has a good ball game. Now to the Patriots at the Jets. Hunter Henry so far the first 2 weeks here. He's back to form like he was in his Los Angeles Charger days here. Hunter Henry finding the end zone in both ball games. So this week here, even in a tough matchup at the New York Jets, I'm giving the nod to Hunter Henry. Tight end's been a weak position so far this season once again. Him and Mac Jones were on the same page. And this Jet team did give up a touchdown to a tight end last week to Jake Ferguson. And Schoonemaker, the backup tight end in Dallas, had 2 touchdowns to tight ends. And this week here, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Henry has a low yardage game but finds the end zone. So he's a start. Now to the Jets, Tyler Conklin. Him and Zach Wilson last season had a pretty decent rapport. And so far in week 2 when Wilson started, he did have 5 catches, 50 yards in the ball game was Tyler Conklin. But I still don't trust him as a total out start this week. I got to see at least 1 or 2 more ball games before I confidently could say put him in the starting lineup. So this week here, he's a sit for me. Now to the Broncos at the Miami Dolphins in this ball game. Adam Troutman's a sit for me in this one. I know Troutman is the starting tight end. Week 1, he had 8.5 fantasy points. And then week 2, the goose egg. I know Greg Gudolchik, he's on injured reserve right now for this Denver Bronco team. But even with that, Troutman's not really a tight end I have confidence in. And he's a sit for me. And now Durham Smythe, I think he's getting part of this offense a little more each week here is Durham Smythe. He's a big target in the red zone. He could go out there and make plays. I know week 2 wasn't a great game for him with only 5.30 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But if Jalen Waddle misses this ball game, I think Smythe is going to pick up some of those targets and make some plays in this ball game. But still, I'm not going to say go out there 100% and start him. But right now, he's a borderline option. Now the Indianapolis Colts at the Baltimore Ravens. Kylan Granson, he's a sit for me. I know he found the end zone in that ball game because this could be a long ball game, especially if Anthony Richardson is out in this one. Even though I think Gardner Minshew is one of the better backup quarterbacks in pro football. But right now, this week here, I can't have confidence in Kylan Granson, even if it's Richardson or obviously Gardner Minshew in this ball game. It's a tough matchup. And like I said last week, if he didn't have that touchdown, he pretty much didn't do anything at all. And now to the Ravens, Mark Andrews back in the lineup week 2. Found the end zone in that one. And this week here, wouldn't be surprising to me, Andrews finds the end zone once again. And we know every week he's pretty much top 2 or 3 tight end. Now to the Panthers at the Seattle Seahawks. Hayden Hurst is a sit for me. I know week 1 he found the end zone, but week 2, non-existent with the goose egg was Hayden Hurst versus New Orleans Saints. And this week here versus Seattle Seahawks, I don't see him doing much in this ball game, is Hayden Hurst. He's not really a big play tight end. And also Bryce Young's a rookie quarterback where he's going to have some consistent games to the tight end and then games like in week 2 where he didn't do anything. So right now, he's a sit for me is Hurst. Now to the Seattle Seahawks, Noah Fant. I know he had a good ball game, nice bounce back game, but 2 inning mouths to feed over there, in my opinion, for the Seahawks team. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Smith-Njigba, the rookie, Kenneth Walker out of the backfield. So this week here, Fant's a sit for me. I know Parkinson, he got some work as well in 2 tight end sets and made a few plays, but he's a sit for me as well in this one. Now to the Bears at the Kansas City Chiefs. Cole Kmet, he's going to be a sit for me in this ball game. This passing game pretty much hasn't done anything in the first 2 weeks of the season here for the Chicago Bear team, and it's pretty much hard to trust anyone on this offense besides DJ Moore. I know week 1 DJ Moore only had 4.5 fantasy points, but last week he went over 100 yards. But in this one, Cole Kmet, like I said, we haven't seen much out of him in the first couple weeks of the season here. I'm not saying to give up on Cole Kmet as a whole this year, but like I said, he's not putting up fantasy points really. Only in PPR leagues, he's had mediocre ball games. But this week here versus the Chiefs, I don't see him doing much. And he's a sit. Travis Kelce, it was good to see him back in week 2. Found the end zone. We know he's the best tight end in football. And he's a start this week. Now to the Dallas Cowboys and the Cardinals. Jake Ferguson, I'm going to give him the nod in this ball game. I know Ferguson so far, he hasn't put up the huge numbers. But last week he found the end zone. Week 1, he had a potential to have a decent ball game, but dropped a few balls. And right here in a good matchup at the Cardinals this week here, I think Ferguson could go out there and make a few plays. Now obviously all the defensive attention is going to roll to CeeDee Lamb in this one, so I wouldn't be surprising me if Ferguson could have 30 or 40 yards in this ball game and possibly find the end zone. Zach Ertz, I'm putting him on the start radar this week. I know it's a tough matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, but if it's one thing that could go out there and make some plays and be a security blanket here for Joshua Dobbs, it's Zach Ertz. And another reason I'm giving him a nod, tight end's been a pretty weak position in fantasy football once again this season here. A lot of inconsistent players. But if it's one thing about Zach Ertz, he just finds a way to get open. He's a good route runner, and he's got a good IQ as well. So right now, I think in this one, he could get you 8-10 fantasy points. I know that's not saying much, but like I said, the tight end position's very weak besides the top 3-4 guys. And right here this week, I think Ertz could put in a top 12 performance, even in a tough matchup. Now to the Steelers at the Vegas Raiders. Pat Freiermuth in this ball game. I know he's coming off a game where he didn't do much in that one, but I think in this one he could go out there and make a few plays. I know it was a bad week 2 with 1.30 fantasy points, but this week I'm going to give Freiermuth the nod because I think he could make plays in the middle of the field here versus Vegas Raider team. We saw in week 1 Troutman have a good ball game, 8.40 fantasy points. And we saw last week Dawson Knox did find the end zone versus the Raiders. So this week here, I'm pretty much saying Freiermuth could have a low yardage game, 25-30 yards, but find the end zone as well. Now, Michael Mayers, he's a sit for me in this one. We haven't seen much out of the rookie. And the tight end position so far in the early going this season here hasn't done much versus Steelers team. Week 1 versus the Niners, George Kittle didn't do much. And then in week 2's ball game, David Njoku didn't do much either. So right now, Mayers is a rookie. And plus, this defense here has been good versus the tight end in the early going. He's a sit for me. Now to the Eagles at the Tampa Bay Bucks. Start for me is Dallas Goedert in this one. Week 1, I know he had the goose head, but week 2, a pretty solid game. 8.20 fantasy points. And we know Goddard can work the team. We know him and Jalen Hurts had a good rapport last season. And this week here, I think they're going to attack the middle of the field here of this Buccaneer defense. I think Jalen Hurts in this one finds Goddard early and often, and he's a starter. Now to the Bucs side of things, this is a tough matchup on paper here, obviously, versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Even though we saw last week TJ Hawkinson find the end zone twice versus the Eagle team. But I think Cade Otton is still a tight end that's on the borderline. So right now, Otton coming off a good week 2 ball game. He's a borderline option for me in this one. This is a game where I think the Bucs are going to have to throw early and often, obviously, versus a tough Eagle defense, especially versus the run. And if they're chasing points, they're going to have to throw the ball. So I think Otton could put on a decent performance, but I'm not saying he's going to be 100% a start. So he's borderline in the final game of the week and second on Monday Night Football. The Los Angeles Rams at the Cincinnati Bengals. So right now, this Ram offense, they've been dynamic the first 2 weeks here, putting up points, and Matthew Stafford really spreading the football around. So right now, Tyler Higbee this week here, he's a start for me. I know in week 2 we didn't see much out of Tyler Higbee, but the tight ends so far in the year we going have put up good numbers versus Bengal team. We saw Andrews find the end zone last week versus Cincinnati Bengal team. And I think this week here, Tyler Higbee could put on a decent performance and get anywhere from 8 to 12 fantasy points. And now to the Bengal side of things, Irv Smith Jr. is a sit for me. This Bengal offense, we really haven't seen much out of them the first 2 weeks, besides T. Higgins going out there and making plays. But everyone else has pretty much been pedestrian and not putting up fantasy numbers. So this week here, Irv Smith, he's got to know the offense a little bit more. The only good thing with Irv Smith so far, he's been healthy the first few games of the season here. Where in previous seasons, he's been out to start the year and stuff. But right now, in this matchup, he's not a tight end I could trust. So that's tight end start sits every matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season.